Completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and the theme of today's episode is where everyone stands. I would always think of that in positive terms. I think it's good that we know where one another stand, but sometimes it hangs in the balance. Case in point, Representative Mike Simpson, Congressman Mike Simpson, has let's just say he's been on a few people's lists. People have been getting kind of frustrated with him as the search for a new Speaker of the House has drawn out. I believe they did elect, what was his name? Congressman Johnson from Louisiana, and I believe it was with pretty broad Republican support. But in the meantime, Mike Simpson, wow, he was at odds with a lot of people over the nomination of Jim Jordan. And I guess he has some ideological differences, but it seems like those differences are becoming more and more clear, bringing us back to the idea of, where everyone stands. Sometimes it's good that we know this, and it's probably good that we know as voters, when we go in to vote, why are we there? What's motivating us? Is it because, I just want more free stuff, or is it because I want government to operate as it's intended to operate, where it's actually serving our interests and not becoming a burden to us or a master to us or something like this? So I'm going to start today with just a little tidbit from Jim Jones' latest editorial in the Times News. He's defending Congressman Simpson, saying Simpson steps up again to protect Idaho's interests in Congress. Now, when Jim says Idaho's interests, you have to realize he is not talking about this in the warmest, fuzziest, most altruistic way possible. This is not the average voter, the average beet farmer, out there. This is, when he talks about Idaho's interests, he means that Simpson stepped up to protect political interests, corporate and political interests, and those who are, very invested in keeping the status quo a thing. This is one of the reasons why Jim fights so hard against those who would restrict government to what it's supposed to be doing, instead of protecting interests of those who help put people in power and keep them in power. So here's what he says. Dorothy Moon, chair of the Idaho Republican Party, has been attacking Representative Mike Simpson for his refusal to support Jim Jordan for Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. Simpson responded in typical fashion, saying, "I will not take Chairwoman Moon's ill-advised input when I've been fighting for Idaho longer than she has lived in the state." Okay, this is, I don't know what you would call it. This is a good old-fashioned Western virtue signal. I lived here longer than 5 generations we've been in the state, and it's unbecoming for anybody, but especially in politicians. It's a thing. And I don't tell you this just so you can go throw onions at whichever politician you choose. I'm just saying, look at the pettiness. Look at the absolute pettiness that politics tends to bring people to. And we're seeing this, in spades right now. And here we are, still a year out from the general election. I mean, does anybody sense that this is going to get better? I'm having a hard time believing it's going to improve, especially with some of the prevailing attitudes here. Now, again, Jim Jones, standing up for Mike Simpson, says, in his response, Simpson pointed out that Jim Jordan has repeatedly taken positions against Idaho's best interests in Congress. Now, look, I'm not trying to throw everybody under the bus here, but are those best interests just strictly defined in political or economic terms? How much money did we bring home? How much taxpayer money did Mike Simpson bring? Because that's how a lot of politicians actually sell themselves. That's when you ask them, how are you doing, in your stewardship as a representative or whatever it may be? If they answer in economic terms, that's only part of what they're charged with doing. They're not there just to generate economic activity. We have a market that does that. Their job is to keep government under control and not just continue adding to it and growing it. Anyway, here's another criticism Jim Jones had for Jordan as Speaker of the House. He says that Jordan had continuous opposition, and Simpson had criticized Jordan's continuous opposition to funding for the Idaho National Laboratory in eastern Idaho. His repeated votes against payments in lieu of taxes program that's so vital to many of Idaho's rural counties his opposition to full funding of wildfire suppression, his opposition to every farm bill, and his repeated votes against funding of Gowan Field, Mountain Home Air Force Base, and overall pay raises for our troops. Well, doesn't that just sound like, in this case, Jim Jordan has been against everything that is good and that is central to America being America? It kind of is meant to sound that way, but that's not at all what it reflects. Now, leave it to State Senator Brian Lenny to give us a good, I would even say a gentle lesson in civics as to how does that work when somebody says no on a particular budget vote. What exactly can we infer from that about their attitude toward humanity or whatever else we're going to read into it? Listen to what Senator Lenny has to point out here. He says, let's clear up a common misconception about voting no on a budget bill. A lot of people think that if you vote against a budget, you're against the organization it funds. But he says that's not always true. And he gives some examples here. When you vote no, he says you're basically saying this budget needs some fine tuning. It's like sending your steak back to the kitchen because it's not cooked right, not because you hate the place. Okay, fair enough. Now, he also says Idaho has a big spending culture. That may feel like a slap, but it's a deserved one. And look, our politicians talk real good fiscal conservatism when it's time to get elected, but when they get up to Capitol Hill and they start governing, it's a big spending culture, and they brag about it. Brad Little probably is the best example of this. So Brian Lenny says, when a budget seems packed with unnecessary expenditures, outpaces inflation, or needlessly grows government, voting no means you want to send it back to the Finance Committee to get reworked. Well, that's not nearly as heartless as what we were led to believe, a no vote represented. Now, he says this means we need to keep an eye on those who vote yes on every single budget without question. It's like agreeing to eat whatever a chef throws on your plate without even tasting it. You're basically giving a free pass to waste, bloat, and inefficiency. I understand. The Jim Joneses of the world would be like, there's no such thing when it involves the state, but this is why Brian Lenny was elected. That's why others like him have been elected. These are the so-called extremists out there to overturn everything that's good about Idaho. What makes them extreme? They understand there are limits and they hold up to them. So as Brian Lenny concludes, when a conservative votes no, we're not against schools, roads, or public safety. Most of the time what we're saying is let's get this right. Let's make sure that every dollar counts. Now, I know politics would require, if you are not, on board the Senator Brian Lenny bandwagon, you got to be looking for some way. There's some flaw, some way we can pick him apart and crush him with this information. Again, this is the nature of politics, and this is what sucks about politics. Everything comes down to a little, somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose. Look, try not to fall over in surprise when I tell you this, but there is such a thing as good government. There is. In fact, good, limited government doing what it was created to do is actually a huge benefit. I would even say it's a blessing, but you don't see it very often. And it's because human nature is we want to grow it. We want to make it, bigger than it was, better than before. We want to fix people. We're going to use the power of government to make everybody safe, make everybody good and virtuous and so forth. That's not what it's there for. And unfortunately, we have been indoctrinated and pushed into a corner, and we're going to lead to with wokeness and the whole woke mind virus. People have been pushed into really not knowing what they believe, and I appreciate what I'm about to share with you. I appreciate the just frankness that Maria Nate Olson brings to this observation. She says occasionally a flare goes up, and you see where everyone is standing. This is one of those times. That's Maria Olson Nate. Sorry, Maria, I butchered your name on the first try here. So she says, Marcia Bjorn, Madison County State Chair or State Committee woman, if we are loyal to our party 75 or 80% of the time, that's good enough. We don't always have to choose just our party. We need to learn to get along. Okay, now what's wrong with that statement? This is the governing mentality of so many people within the power structures in Idaho, within all the various branches of government and all the municipalities and so forth. That's the same kind of attitude that they have, as long as we get along most of the time, that's good enough. But there are some places where we got to stand firm. And so here's the point. Well, we'll be loyal 75 or 80% of the time. That's just pragmatic enough that you'll abandon your principles when you need them the most. Okay, I'm not trying to advocate for, you must toe this hard party line, and that's the only thing you should believe. I'm just saying, if you're going to line up with people, you need to be consistent, at least in your principles. There's a lot of wiggle room for opportunists there. So Maria Olson Nate says, sorry, I can't get along with people who want to indoctrinate my kids with their woke ideology at every turn. I know. This is not something an unreasonable person would have said 5 years ago or today. But it's treated as what a horrible thing to say. I can't get along with people who think it's okay for kids to be at drag queen story time. Again, this is mainstream thought. What she's saying here is not, oh, wow, I can't believe she actually said that. Most of us feel that way. So why are we being backed in a corner where you can't acknowledge that? Marie Olson Nate says, I can't get along with people who want to give a boy puberty blockers because he likes the color pink. Now, this is a far cry from going out and just picking fights. It's drawing some lines. Now, this one I thought would make at least a few people think. There's more to being a Republican than guns and babies. I'm still thinking about that one myself, but it was definitely a worthy thought. Is that how Republicans' opponents see them? Yeah, they're just all about their guns and their babies. Maria Olson Nate says, I can't get along with people who happily spend my tax dollars to exponentially grow government, making us slaves to the tax man. You realize when you're out there advocating for politics and government and this and that and this levy and that levy, that's what you're doing. So you better be sure that money is being spent wisely, or maybe it's time to say no, right? That's a hard thing to do. Finally, Maria Olson Nate concludes, I'm a high achiever. I won't settle for a 75% conservative because that's how we turn into Colorado, Washington, and California. Be better than 75%. Idaho. Now, I would echo what she's saying, but I'm going to take it outside of strictly a partisan thing. So, let's all be 100% Republicans and dedicated to the Republican platform. I think what it really comes down to is if you're one of those people who believes that the primary dynamic that should drive every human interaction is political power, I don't know a nice way to say this, but you're the problem. You are part of the problem. So to the extent we can see that kind of thinking in ourselves and root it out, that's probably a good thing to do. And as far as knowing where everyone stands, pay attention. What politicians represent as their interests, or actually our interests, well, right, we're all in this together, you and me, we, wink, wink. I mean, it's just like con artists use. Just got to get your camaraderie and your trust here. Yes, we're in this all together. But they don't really feel the consequences when one of their policies fails. So they'll say anything to get into power. They'll do anything to stay in power once they've been elected. Just be careful, don't put too much faith in those political saviors. You're going to be disappointed every time. And when it comes to where everyone stands, the most important fix that you can get is, first of all, where do you stand? Work on that first, and then we'll get around to helping others figure out their own stand. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.